Hi there. Now you'll see the top 5 best tier 10 heavy tanks in World of Tanks. The main criteria in compiling the top is relevance of a tank in current random. A year ago I already made a similar video, but it's been a while since then, so I decided to update the old list. It's also important to note that this list will not include reward tanks, such as Chieftain or Object 279. Well, let's begin. In the 5th place are 2 tanks at once. These are the Chinese VZ-111-5A and the Soviet Object 277. Both of these tanks are very strong and versatile vehicles, which also despite its class have very nice mobility. This is especially true for the 277th, as in terms of mobility it surpasses many medium tanks, because its top speed is 60 km per hour. The mobility of the VZ-111-5A is slightly worse, but nevertheless it's also good. Both vehicles have 490 damage per shot, but the damage per minute is much higher for the Chinese. And in general it has more comfortable gun, better stabilization and aiming time, and the depression angle is 7 degrees, instead of the awful 5 as with the Object. In terms of armor both of these tanks are pretty mediocre. Both the WZ-111-5A and the Object 277 have no problem penetrating the upper hull part, let alone the bottom. You shouldn't think there is no armor at all, it's there, and it even works sometimes, just in comparison to other tier 10 heavy tanks it's very weak. It's also important to note that the 277th has a slightly stronger turret, due to the fact that its hatch is smaller than that of the Chinese. Separately it's worth noting their sides, which because of their toxic shape often absorb shells. If you can't decide which one is best to buy, they are almost indistinguishable with a few exceptions. The 277th has slightly better mobility, and the VZ-111-5A has slightly better gun, and also the Chinese has a more comfortable depression angle of the gun, that's all. In short, both of these tanks though not particularly strong and a bit outdated against all the new overpowered tanks, but they are still interesting vehicles worthy of attention. In the 4th place is the once toxic and overpowered Cranvan. Although now, after release of the new patch he is just toxic. Who don't know, in the 1.18 patch it was nerfed stabilization, damage per minute and the top speed. Of course, this has not strongly affected the effectiveness of this tank, after all it annoyed his impenetrable turret and will continue to annoy, but the comfort of playing became significantly worse, so I personally now don't want to play it. But the fact remains the Cranvan is still one of the strongest tier 10 heavy tanks. It still has a very strong turret, 12 degrees of depression of the gun, as well as a clip for 3 shells with 440 damage per shot. At the same time even after the nerf the reload is pretty quick. All of this makes the Cranvan a very strong vehicle in positional firefights. In fact, now, except for the mediocre stabilization and weakly armored hull, the Cranvan has only one significant drawback, it's the rounds. The basic rounds type is APCR and their average penetration is 252 mm. And the golden rounds type is heat and their average penetration is 300 mm. If you are an unskilled player and don't know well the weaknesses and vulnerabilities of tanks, I highly recommend you not to play Cranvan, because it will not bring you any fun. Well, if you are an average player and want a strong and relevant autoloader, in that case the Cranvan is your choice. In the 3rd place is the British Super Conqueror. This is already a real legend of World of Tanks. Since its release, its efficiency was a head above the other tanks, and everyone waited when it will be nerfed. And what do you think? It's been 4 years and the Super Conqueror has not yet nerfed. And this cannot but rejoice. Of course, there is the arms race, and the Briton doesn't look as strong as before, but nevertheless it is still a versatile warrior and one of the best heavy tanks in the game. Indeed, last year it took the 1st place. And for a reason. After all, it has a really comfortable in all aspects gun. Accuracy, stabilization, aiming time, depression angle, all of this is awesome. The damage per shot is pretty low, and is only 400. But the damage per minute can be improved to as much as 3,700. If I'm not mistaken, this is the highest damage per minute among all heavy tanks in the game. The mobility of this tank was a minus before, but after the Equipment 2.0 release it ceased to be a drawback. This is because now you can use such a wonderful equipment as a turbocharger. It's, by the way, a must-have thing for the Super Conqueror. In terms of armor, everything is nice too. There is one obvious vulnerability in the form of the hull bottom, as well as a hatch that can be penetrated, but only by heat shells. Otherwise the armor is very strong. In short, the Super Conqueror is a versatile, easy to learn and very effective tank that will suit both beginners and experienced players. In the second place is unexpectedly the French heavy tank, AMX M454. Surprised? Me too. Objectively, it was one of the weakest tier 10 heavy tanks, and something had to be done about it. It had really weak and unremarkable guns and controversial armor. I knew it would be upgraded and hoped it would get better armor. But the developers decided to do otherwise, and upgraded its guns. Let me clarify at once that I consider this tank exclusively with a 130mm gun. So, now, in 1.18 patch AMX M454 has just an incredible gun. Damage per shot is 560, damage per minute can be improved to 3100. And its accuracy, stabilization and aiming time are amazing. Seriously, you can see for yourself what kind of stabilization it has. And I don't even use a stabilizer. Honestly, this is my build. And of course a nice depression angle of 8 degrees. Also worth noting another interesting feature. Golden shells are AP here, and their average penetration is 296mm. For some players this is a minus, because this penetration is not enough to confidently penetrate the forehead of the E100 turret, for example. But in general, it's not an obvious disadvantage, because in most situations these shells will be no less, if not more effective than APCR or heat with more penetration, because of the normalization features. Okay, with this we have solved. Now let's talk about mobility and armor. AMX M454 has excellent mobility as for a heavy tank. Especially if you use a turbocharger, which I highly recommend. Of course, it's not Object 277, but nevertheless its mobility is very good. And of course the armor is also an obvious plus for the Frenchman. Yes, it's non-standard, and you have to know how to use it. Frankly, I'm so enthused about AMX M454 now, that I will most likely make a video about it in the near future. Well, if you still haven't played it for some reason, I highly recommend trying it. After all, it's a very comfortable, strong, and one-of-a-kind tank that you're sure to like. And finally the first place. Of course this is the Czech VZ55. Incredibly strong, toxic and overpowered tank. Frankly, I don't know why the developers made this tank so strong, and why it's still not nerfed. Just think, it can do 1000 damage in just 2 seconds thanks to its imbalanced clip. Such firepower is comparable to the Jag Panzer E100. In addition, other gun features can't be called mediocre, they are pretty comfortable for such a powerful clip. It's worth noting the gun depression angle, that is 8 degrees. I don't understand why the developers gave it exactly 8, because this tank is already too strong. That's about the gun. In terms of mobility, Czech also doesn't disappoint, because its mobility is comparable to the French AMX M454. That is, you can easily be one of the first to take a position at the beginning of battle, or easily change the flank. Among other things, it's also not deprived of armor. On the one hand, some may say his armor is very weak. Partly this is true, because by the numbers this armor is about the same as that of the Object 277. But on the other hand, in practice this armor often works very well, and somehow magically absorbs shells. This applies to the turret, hull and sides as well. In short, its armor is not very strong, but nevertheless it is, and this is a fact. In conclusion on the tank itself, I would like to say that now it's really the strongest tank in the game, with the exception of Chieftain of course. VZ55 is so strong and toxic largely due to its overpowered and imbalanced firepower. There are rumors that it might be nerfed in the next patch, and I hope so. So if you haven't played it yet, and want to try it, hurry before it gets nerfed. Well, that was the top 5 best tier 10 heavy tanks in 2022 according to the Russian Expert channel. Write in the comments what you think about it. Thank you for watching this video to the end. I hope you found it useful. It's time to say goodbye. Good luck to everyone, and remember, don't play World of Tanks.